Adam's Sabbatical. You could consider Portia's high watermark to be when somebody made the off-the-cuff remark that Adam's writing had gotten so good that he ought to be isolated from society and sent on a creative sabbatical. Because Adam started to write little by little, and at the beginning only about the most obscure unnoticed things, which meant basically thought streams about books he'd read, books he'd dug up somewhere in a country house attic. No one else had ever read them, and when they read Adam's reviews no one felt any flashes of recognition or of identification. But at some point things in Adam's mind had suddenly converged, forming a big, straightforward, combative construction. The sage in him had awakened. In multiple articles he warned people of the ways they must not live, and gave instructional examples of what would happen if they ignored his guidance. In the place of what was old, tried and failed, he always offered new and more hopeful modes of living, so, in a word, he acted as a genuine shepherd holding forth from the pulpit. As his themes were vivid and immediate, they hit his readers close to home, and were, so to speak, life hacks for adepts, and they became popular beyond belief. At one point he came up with several new pieces each week, ripping open and then shooting to pieces one vice after another. The sabbatical idea caught fire instantly. It was like the invention of something totally unforeseen. A half hour after the first word had dropped, the editorial board was all whipped up and there was a rowdy crowd in the room. Things moved faster than the speed of sound. They chose the sabbatical's chief organiser, whose job was to get the word out and collect money. They put together a pamphlet, written in a lofty, literary style, in which they called on people to make lightning donations, but admitted that the whole idea required thorough preparation. They needed to organise not only provisions and an allowance, but also a place where the young talent could compose in peace. Rusnak's studio looked like the chief apartment of a civil service, and Arkadiusz himself was its most zealous. He practically offered to spring for half of the fee, although it was still only a distant, hazy, noble idea. And then everybody started to argue over when the deadline ought to be, and people divided into two factions. Some thought that they ought to put Adam on a train tomorrow, or no later than in a week's time, lest the matter dull and the tide of inspiration go out. The other, more moderate group thought that it certainly couldn't be so soon. Funding would stay too tight, and things would just go on as usual. Then they argued over whether the talent had to come back with a fat folder of work. Again, some were of the opinion that there's no point in sending him to go piss in the wind, while the others argued that the main thing was to give the talent the opportunity to unwind, because a rested talent is a productive talent. Others thought, again, that they should just postpone the whole mess to the summer, because the early spring, which is to say the winter spring, is just lousy and miserable everywhere. The recipient himself, pleasantly surprised by the hot excitement that had overcome everyone, was content to say that he was fine with anything. "The main thing is that there's nobody around to fucking pester me," he said, wandering about the room and itching himself. "Heating is okay. I mean, I've had to heat houses with wood stoves a gazillion times." The guy who had first come up with such a fruitful idea had lost his wits a bit. Now they wanted to make him treasurer, and everyone was looking at him, this noble knight, in the full expectation that he would suddenly offer up his own cash. But there wasn't anywhere to get that cash. The burgher in question was known for living outside his means. He was generous at heart, but as soon as the subject got on to money, he got a little bit dour. He had a shitload of pets at home, who together ate as much as an average pony. Likewise, these animals suffered from endless illnesses that demanded frequent medical intervention, and this put large, reproachful holes in his budget. Now they were all already making plans, he thought that they ought to be especially attentive to deadlines. "There's some fanatics here talking a several-month sabbatical, but I say 2 months makes a person sad, but 1 is a vacation. And in terms of the levée de fond, then I can cough it up in 2 parts, half in February and half by the 5th of March. No way I can do it at once." The comrade thought for a bit, and then added, "There are tons of places you can go for a literary vacation, and actually you only need a minimum to live and eat, so the plan is extremely realistic. I'm allowed to pay my bills, right? When I've made my stupid monthly payments, I'll definitely have like 50 left over, and then I can put it together. A monthly art and literature tax. But so things are fair and square, we ought to make a plan, or a queue, who's going on vacation and when. In The Master and Margarita, the writers get serious heat for their vacations." Arkadiusz hopped into the ring and rubbed his hands together. "What a right beautiful thing. Nobody actually has any money themselves, but together we do. And if everybody gives an honest bit, then it's like living the dream for one person. At the same time, announced the kibitzing burgher, whom they now called Pan Tramp, because his background was too good to mention, and he'd become an inescapable part of Poisia, like a corn that has suddenly grown on the bottom of your foot. The sabbatical should motivate a ton of contributions, and in the long term, hostility and jealousy. As is clear, he had his head in the right place, even if, in his heart, he was rooting as much for the idea and for Adam as for the whole strained lot of them. Those still in school and people claiming they're broke can give little donations, Pan Tramp offered defiantly. I think contributions can also be in potatoes. Sure, they've started to sprout a bit by now, but what are you going to do if you don't have any money? Then onions, old potatoes. A package of pemmican or spam also does the trick. A sabbatical isn't much different from an expedition to the North Pole, because let's not forget that nobody looks into the envelope. All contributions are anonymous, even if they're wool socks. But listen, Arcadius said. A collective endeavour like a sabbatical shouldn't be limited to a one-off. Someone else should be able to take part after Adam. And no comrade should be slinking around the pews with a hat in his hand. That's an unworthy task, Suliswaf declared. And don't I know it? I've had to slink around church benches with a hat in my hand God knows how many times. A person who gets a marching band send-off for his sabbatical should feel nothing but the pressure of his conscience, which is to say, we don't expect our comrade to come back with a full manuscript in his bag, and that's that. The knowledge that you have to do something is the surest way to tie a person up forever, because let's not forget that writing becomes an unjust, cruel punishment the moment you have to do it. Then Suliswaf suddenly said, I suggest Poisia Emeritus member Jerzy Niemiec as a candidate for a sabbatical. The chief apartment fell silent. I support Jerzy Niemiec's candidacy, Roznak announced tentatively. That requires the creation of a rescue committee for Jerzy Niemiec, Adam offered wisely. I'm opposed to Niemiec's candidacy, Pan Tramp blustered. We've heard about his shameful behaviour before. He'll take our hard-earned money and then go piss it away like there's no tomorrow. Most likely Jerzy will just fuck us over, Suliswaf observed. But despite that, it's crappy to think that such a talent is squatting in the attic at his mum's and can't even afford cigarettes. Maybe we should bring him some potatoes and some smokes. Then again, it might just piss him the hell off. The night before Adam Mickiewicz's sabbatical was a lively party. They brought oranges, flowers, lemonade, and also, of course, stronger stuff. This was, in every sense, a fair way of doing things. Adam had stopped drinking long before, and the others could drink with a clean conscience, and their Sabbatarian would be able to slop around on the train, not with a hangover, but with happy memories of other people's faux pas. There were more people gathered in the studio than ever before, and it looked like a family reunion. People had brought their sisters and brothers along, one even their parents. You might say that Warsaw's coolest crowd was together that night, and they came from absolutely every walk of life, from the woodworking factory to the anchor of the National Public News Service. The studio, which consisted of 2 rooms and a teeny kitchen, was crammed wall to wall with people, and you couldn't fit past the heap of overclothes in the front room except by carefully squeezing through, and somebody's overcoat was always falling on your head. There was such a mess of shoes and wellies strewn around on the floor that surely someone or other must have gone home barefoot. How much altogether, Suliswaf wanted to know, as the envelope made its last rounds from hand to hand. Pan Tramp had carefully counted everything up in the kitchen and announced, faintly, double. The festive moment was at hand. All the guests were lined up in the big room against one wall, beneath a big, just-painted poster with letters 3 spans high. Bon voyage, Pan Mickiewic. It was an honest slogan. In front of everyone, the envelope was turned cheerfully over to Adam. Those who wished could make a speech, and finally they took a group picture. In it, Mickiewic is standing in front of everybody. He has a confident expression and a childishly happy smile on his lips. He's wearing a shirt with a pattern of tiny pine cones, and his hair is nicely combed. The editorial board awaits your first dispatch by post, along with a list of purchases, somebody quipped. What do you mean, list of purchases? 22 tablets of pemmican and a chronometer? Like that? Allez, next you'll demand he keep his receipts. Let the guy relax now, Pan Tramp bristled. He was milling about like a hen, making sure everybody had a full glass. He took drinks out of bags and put them on the table, and now and again he and Bioe organised piles of crap that got too big. They'd smoked the air blue, so that weaker members could barely breathe and occasionally had to go outside to walk for a bit. When they came back, the noise had roared several degrees louder, the window of the big room was open despite the ferocious cold, and the bolder ones came in and out through the window in order to avoid the precarious coat rack in the front room. There was a little disco in the smaller room in the back. People were so happy and so friendly, the future so promising, that things could not actually get any better than they were. Those who'd come from afar started to head out before midnight, but those from nearby and the hardier ones stayed until morning. No one got in an argument. Nobody got hit. Nobody was left by the wayside. Even the loneliest girls found a boy, and the shyest boys found a girl. It was a blessed night. Considered more closely, naturally, the sabbatical seemed more like an exile, of course. Travelling through the cold, snowy, sleepy country by train, Adam was still feeling driven and ambitious. His backpack was jammed with food. Heaviest bag I've ever carried, he would later say. Roll your owns too, for what else does a person need to survive? But he still had to make it there in the first place. The trip to his den lasted 5 hours, and the dusk was already settling in by the time Adam made it to his unheated cottage. All the same, this wasn't a sabbatical into the 19th century. The building had electricity, and the last occupant had left wood waiting in a nice stack in front of the mouth of the stove.